You are listening to INTERFORM Podcast with Ro on the radio. You're going to want to hear this.
Welcome to INTERFORM Podcast. It's me, Ro on the radio, and I've got a special guest. I say this every time. My guests are always special, but like the biggest brain you will ever meet in your life, the smartest woman ever, Dr. Lisa Corrigan. Thank you so much for being here. Let me tell you, I got my notes with me so I don't forget anything. Dr. Lisa Corrigan is a professor of communication, director of the Gender Studies program at the University of Arkansas. She is the award-winning author of Prison Power, and she has a list of books that she has written. She also co-hosts a popular podcast, so she's a fellow podcaster. She does all that in a podcast too. And she has worked as a political strategist, if I said that correctly, and consultant for over 25 years, which is why we have her on the show today, because we want to talk about like what exactly is on the ballot. A lot of people don't know. A lot of people don't know what's important or why it's important. So before we talk about the ballot itself, what do voters need to know specific to the separation of powers in Arkansas among the executive, legislative, and judicial branches?
So Arkansas is a really interesting state. I'm happy to be here
to
talk about it with you, Ro. I'm always happy to be here with you, Ro, but especially about this because we have a really weak executive branch. So the governor has a weak veto, and the legislature has more power in Arkansas than a lot of other states. So you know, a lot of people are going to be voting for members of the state legislature. The House is up for election every 2 years, and the members of the state Senate are up every 6 years. So even while there are all these national contests happening, the state ballot is really, really important in Arkansas because we have a lot of power distributed through the legislative branch that people need to pay attention to, in addition to the executive branch and the judicial races for judge.
Wow. Okay, so now what is the direct democracy, and does Arkansas have progressive access to direct democracy or no?
So you would think maybe that the South doesn't have a lot of access to power through democratic action. You would be mostly right about that, but Arkansas has really progressive politics actually about direct democracy. So you could do ballot initiatives in Arkansas, and the threshold both for votes and for approval is really low. So currently it's 50%. It's really, really low. So the regular people can run ballot initiatives if they get enough signatures, and they can put issues on the ballot and just circumvent the legislature and directly produce the outcomes that they want by circumventing their legislative members. And that's something that a lot of states don't have. So it's really an advantage in Arkansas. So like there is a lot of untapped potential in Arkansas to produce democratic action. And I think people just don't know that they have that. So this ballot in particular reflects that kind of access to democratic participation.
That's a good thing. That actually made me smile a little bit. You always hear about the South in general being kind of behind on a few things.
It's regressive on voting rights. Don't get me wrong, for sure. But direct democracy initiatives are actually that's something that's unique to Arkansas.
How do we find sample ballots in Arkansas?
So you can go online to the Secretary of State John Thurston's website.
Okay.
And there's a drop-down menu, and you just put in your county and your zip code, and it will produce your sample ballot. And the midterm elections are essential to vote in because a lot of issues and offices are on that ballot. So you should access it before you go. Otherwise, you're going to be reading some of this stuff for the first time in the voting booth.
And it's going to take a while. Isn't there a limit? You can only stay in there for a certain amount of time. So it would probably behoove us to look at a sample ballot.
You want to do the research because especially on the 4 issues on the ballot, there are a lot of things to consider. So it's a really good idea to go and look at the comprehensive ballot and check out the sample ballot. You can also check your voter registration status there, and all of the voting information is available. And that was actually a law that was passed. We had to pass a law to make sure that sample ballots were available in every county. So go and use that. That was a hard-fought battle, actually.
Can we talk about how ballots are organized? Like, how does that whole thing work?
So the ballot is organized from national to municipal.
Okay.
So it goes from the biggest offices to the most local to you. So you'll have, the offices in a midterm election cycle for U.S. Congress, right? And then you'll move through to the state level, right? So that'll be governor, that will be members of the legislature, that will be members of the state Supreme Court. And then you'll have local issues, right? So that'll be your, elected county officials, right? All the way down to municipal bonds, usually tax measures. And then you'll have the issues on the ballot.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the 4 issues on the statewide ballot.
That sounds great.
How are special issues added to the ballot?
Okay, so there are only 2 ways to get a special issue on the ballot. One is direct democracy, right? Where you run a ballot initiative, you get the signatures to make a count, and then it goes on the ballot. So that's everyday people can do that, right? You have to write the language, it gets approved, and then you can put it on the ballot. The other way is that the state legislature votes to put 2 issues on the ballot. So they always get 2 issues on the ballot to 3. And, the people don't have much of a say in that. They just get the say through their elected officials. So those are the only way that the issues get on the ballot, but they're generally between 3 and 5 issues.
Okay. So issue 1.
Mm-hmm.
Issue 1 is giving state senators and representatives authorities to call special legislative sessions. What are special sessions, and why do members of legislature want the power to call them?
So currently, only the governor has the power to call legislative sessions. So the Arkansas legislature is part-time. They only meet for a couple of months in the springs. In the, what is this, an odd year? In an even year, it's a fiscal session. In an odd year, it's a policy session.
Okay, so we're in policy session.
Coming up, for next January. And so they usually meet from January to April, and then they do all the legislating. So everybody in the Arkansas state legislature has another job for the most part. It's part-time. So that sort of limits who can be elected and who will run, right? Who has the kind of financial flexibility or support to do that. So issue 1 came through the legislature and had a legislative support from the Republican Party to allow the legislature itself to call special sessions, which means that usually the governor does it to resolve fiscal issues or for crises that come up or to reappropriate money for major unexpected events, And so we had one of those this year in a fiscal session. But the legislature wants the ability to call any special sessions about anything that it wants.
At any time?
At any time.
Okay.
So, there are some concerns about that, obviously, because the legislature can usually get all of its work done in the legislative session. So the question is, why do they want more time? They get more per diem, right? So they get reimbursed, they get more pay to come down and work in the legislative session. But on the whole, those special sessions aren't really dense policy debates. Usually they're a place for wedge issues and culture wars and non-essential tasks of governing. And so, I would say that is generally the largest critique lobbed at it. On the other hand, if the governor is the only person who can call a special session, the legislature wants more power to manage that. Although the executive branch is really weak, and the special session is something that helps the executive to balance that power to have the only authority to call the special session.
So they want more money.
I mean, that is a critique that is lobbed at this particular issue, especially since it came out of the legislature. So
it's interesting. Okay, issue 2 requires that 60% of voter approval for constitutional amendments and citizen proposed state laws. Why is this important, and why are critics worried that it erodes citizen power?
Because we want a lower threshold for people to participate in ballot initiatives. So when you have a lower number of people that need to agree for it to be on the ballot, then you have greater access to putting citizen initiatives on the ballot. So increasing the threshold would erode that power and make it harder for the general public to get their agenda in front of the entire statewide voting body.
Wow. So their issues aren't really going to be seen or heard because there's more people.
Yes, there's no doubt that issue 2 is a way of eroding access to direct democracy. And we can debate about whether that's good or bad, but I mean, as an absolute fact, that
democracy
is the goal.
Is the whole point.
I mean, for me, it is. I think that the jury's out across America and really around the world right now
Absolutely.
about where folks are falling on the Democratic participation good argument.
Issue 3. You ready for this? Yes, you are, because you're smart and you did all the questions.
Put me in, coach.
Arkansas Religious Freedom Amendment. Ooh, it's going to get juicy. Arkansans already have religious freedom under the 13th. Oh, I'm sorry, did I say that correct? Title 7 of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Yes. How does this amendment work?
It's going to blanket allow people to use religious freedom as their response to challenges from the state.
Oh.
So they'll be able to say, I have the religious freedom to do X.
To not follow the rules.
I mean, potentially, yes.
Do I have the religious freedom to rob a bank? Can I use that? I mean, not me personally.
Probably not, because banks are federally insured, so that'd be a federal crime. So probably
you're so
not.
Smart. Weasel my way out of that one. Okay.
Yeah, but this law would allow you to say, I'm following my religious conscience, and I'm going to deny birth control access, or I'm going to, I'm not going to produce this medical outcome or give this. Right. I mean, there are lots of different ways, and they could say that I was following my religion.
So, for example, and this is just hypothetically speaking, if I'm a doctor and I say I don't want to provide trans health care because it goes against my religion, I can say that.
You can see where we're at.
Interesting. That's all I'll say about that. Issue 4. Arkansas's adult use cannabis amendment. Now, with Biden administration decriminalizing cannabis possession, there's been a lot of talk about the amendment. Can you break it down for us? I feel like people don't really understand what that means. Like when they hear it, it's like, that means I can just smoke weed whenever I want to. But in my opinion, and I could be wrong, I'm not a Dr. Lisa Corrigan. In my opinion, when he decriminalized cannabis, it means that people who are incarcerated for simple possession should be not incarcerated. There should be like a release. Is that pretty much the meat and potatoes of it? Or
for the Biden administration, yes, but for this statewide issue, no.
Oh.
So the statewide issue does not provide for the release of convictions for possession or sale.
Okay,
at all. It doesn't vacate any of those sentences. It also limits the number of licenses for recreational production to the people who are already producing for medical.
Okay.
The tax structure, I think people would want to look into on that voting guide, right? So the Secretary of State's website, where you would find your sample ballot, there's also a link to the University of Arkansas Public Policy panel. We have a public policy group that's nonpartisan that does a breakdown of the issues. So I think people would be very curious to see about who gets to produce, right, recreational marijuana, who gets to own the license, how much can you possess. It does not provide for home growing, right? So it's very business forward for a very small number of licenses for people who already have the market cornered on medicinal. So depending on how you feel about that, you definitely want to read more about that amendment.
Read more about that.
There are ways, I think, that other states have decriminalized recreational marijuana. It's clearly coming nationwide.
Which is a good thing.
Yeah, it's a good thing.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the majority of people who are in
prison, out a little bit of hope,
Yeah, the majority of people who are in prison are there for property crimes related to drug possession. So, I mean, obviously that's an equity issue, right? Because it's a complete racial disparity. But I think folks should read that amendment very carefully.
Absolutely. All right, so let's talk about, we'll be putting up the University of Arkansas Public Policy Center ballot guide on the webpage, but what additional resources do you recommend for people to find out more information about candidates and about issues on the ballot?
So 2 things. One, I think the League of Women Voters does great voter outreach, and they have great nonpartisan, issue-specific, race-specific information. 2 is that, we're not seeing a GOP candidate stand for public debates, not just in Arkansas, but across the country. They are refusing to participate and public debates
Why
as a
is
form.
that?
They
They're
don't think
scared?
they have to. Well, I mean, I'm happy to speculate. Part of it is that they don't really have a platform right now that they're running on, except not that guy. And part of it is that they are trying to change the way that elections do or don't work, right? So there's been a huge conversation across the country about gerrymandering and electoral maps. There's been a huge conversation about who will certify votes. And certainly there are candidates on the GOP side, not so much in Northwest Arkansas, but across the country who will refuse to certify votes for the opposite parties, right? GOP members are refusing before they're even elected.
You could do that?
No, you can't do that, but they
Gosh.
want to do that. So, I would say that this is a moment that is a crisis for Democratic participation. It's hard because there are all these candidate forums that are being hosted here in Northwest Arkansas and across the state, and the only people who are showing up are the Democratic candidates. So if that's the kind of world that you want to live in, I mean, I guess do that. But if democracy is your jam and you're actually interested in the representation of a wide variety of opinions and people, then people actually have to have clash and have to debate policies on the basis of their merits and whether or not they produce advantages or disadvantages for the communities they're pretending to serve. So I think we're in it's a really dark moment for democracy, I think, in the United States and really around the world. I mean, the Prime Minister of Britain just resigned this morning. I mean,
What?
After 6 weeks in office, the Swedish government has just, ushered in a really fascist, white supremacist government. So there is a global shift as a bunch of wealth has been transferred during the pandemic and as migration has increased because of climate change. And these issues are not going to go away. So it's great because we're seeing huge surges in voter turnout. Certainly we saw it with the Kansas
Kansas did their
constitutional amendment.
thing.
Yeah. And the turnout in Georgia has been insane. It's been amazing. So, I think for folks who are really engaging in the democratic process now, whether as first-time voters or maybe they're paying attention more, I would say, looking through the ballot and reading about the candidates and what each, candidate position does, whether it's city council or whether it's justice of the peace or these are really, really, really essential positions that actually impact you on a daily basis,
Exactly. And more of a reason for people to get involved with who is in their local government, because I feel like, and we talked about this with Jenny, is that certain people only participate and only vote in like primary elections, and they don't think that your local elections matter, but
They matter more.
It starts at the local level. So the people that are governors and get to Congress, they started off at the local level. So it's kind of like, if you don't do your part with them here at the local level, then it will get to the point where they are making these final decisions about things that affect your life.
Yeah. I mean, Washington County, where we live, got a bunch of CARES money from the federal government. And, our county administrators have been sitting on that money and not spending it because it was a block grant, which means that they could spend it on whatever they wanted, prison expansion or whatever, but not indoor air quality and not public health campaigns and not a bunch of things that, we really need, especially for public health in Northwest Arkansas. So, in some ways it seems more daunting to learn about local candidates because the coverage isn't so widespread, right? You can't just turn on the TV and have wall-to-wall coverage like you can in a presidential election. So the coverage isn't the same, but also the GOP candidates are not campaigning in public. So they're not even showing up at candidate forums. So is that kind of shadowy governance the way that we want things to go? I mean, certainly there are two sides to that debate, but I don't know. They're certainly not both equally valid from a perspective of democratic participation. So I think while I absolutely understand the barriers to entry, especially given how poor our political education is, this is the time to engage and not look away and dive in and read the voter guides and educate yourself and take your sample ballot into the voting booth.
Absolutely. Early voting in Arkansas runs from October 24th to November 7th. Election day is November 8th. Just want to make sure y'all heard me. You always say that people need to make a plan to vote. What do you mean by that?
So when are you going to do early voting? Are you taking people in your family with you? Who in your community needs a ride? Are you going to print out sample ballots? So sometimes on Facebook, I'm like, here's who I'm voting for, right? So that other people are like, oh, well, Corrigan's voting for them. Then I can, ask her about what she thinks about schwa. I'll ask them some questions about this or that. And so are you somebody that people feel safe talking about elections too?
Do you know where you're going to go
Where
vote?
is your polling place?
You got to work or those kind of plans.
See, I used to be a vote on the day of voting.
Oh,
And
really?
Like as a family thing, like my people are voting people. They're like, that's the thing we do. And we used to get scooped up from school and go vote and get an ice cream. I'm about that life. So I usually take my kid voting with me, and she gets a sticker. And, when she was real little, I would let her, touch the screen.
That's important. Make it a positive experience.
Yeah, this is community. You have a social responsibility to do this. It's not the only social responsibility that you have.
Right.
It's necessary, but not sufficient. But still, we're going to go do that as a family. So are you taking your kids to vote? I'm always taking my kid to vote. Can I take your kid to vote? Get in the car.
Yes.
Right. So, but you got to have a plan to vote. But now I early vote because I think that the threat to voting is so substantial that those early votes really, really matter. And they're a really important thing to safeguard. Also, shout out to poll workers, right?
Absolutely.
Because that has become a really fraught place to be, especially in states and municipalities and districts and counties that are contested or have these like really open culture wars where people feel empowered to harass poll workers. Like poll work, that's an important work of democracy. They are, doing a public service, a nonpartisan public service, and they are to be applauded. They're community members who are doing really important work for us.
Absolutely. And given their time and energy to make sure the process goes smoothly. So
well, and they're explaining changes. Like we have changes to voting all the time, right? Are you going to you got to bring your ID? If not, you get a provisional ballot. So make sure you have a current ID. It's not expired.
That's part of planning.
That's part of planning for voting. So, I feel really strongly about everybody not just, winging it during early voting or assuming that things will necessarily go smoothly on voting day. So early voting is a real asset to democracy. Honestly, we should have it everywhere. Also, we should have, I think, compulsory, voter registration at 18,
just get it done. You know what I mean? Like,
this is the only country. This is the only democratic country in the world where we actually work to undermine people's ability to vote, and it's not just a taken for granted thing that happens as soon as you're of voting age. So that's a part of the paradox of American democracy is how many people we withhold it from intentionally.
Man, why is voting in this midterm election so important, particularly in Arkansas?
I think there are real opportunities on the ballot. So I think for some of these races, it's the best crop of candidates that have ever been recruited to run.
That's big to say.
Yeah, it is. I'm a political pessimist. So for me to be like, these are good candidates, almost universally, these are the best candidates I've seen in my almost 20 years in Arkansas. So the ballot is full of good candidates that you should be learning more about. We've seen more women and people of color on the ballot than ever before in Arkansas. And so that's nice to see.
It is.
And I think that we are really desperately close to spiraling into fascism. And so it's like, this is a sort of do or die moment for democracy. And I'm not being hyperbolic about that. I mean, really, I think November will determine the next 50 years and a lot of freedoms that are going to be taken away. So people do not understand how dire it is and how important it is to vote. And I think, my political opinion is that the biggest turner of voter turnout, the biggest driver of voter turnout will be abortion, I think,
of course,
as a federalized issue. And I think locally, because so many candidates are hiding from the questions in the forums.
Absolutely.
They don't want to answer questions about it. They don't want to be on the record about it. And so I think some of the turnout in Arkansas will be very interesting to see. We have the lowest voter turnout in the entire country. We're number 50.
What?
So there are opportunities here to recruit people to vote.
We're number 50, though.
Yeah, take them with you.
Not even 47.
No, it's not like poverty. This is the one. It's number one. Get your foam finger. So,
son of a fish.
I know it's not ideal.
Goodness.
We've got more work to do. That said, there are new groups that are filling in the gap and that are really working to register voters and get people to the polls. I'm thinking about your seniors. Where are your seniors at? Are you taking them to the polls? Who needs a ride? Call me. I'm coming to get you. Right. But You got to think about your community and where. In some places, they'll give free Uber rides, right,
Oh,
for voting.
wow.
So, I think we need better voting infrastructure, and we're looking down the barrel of way less voting infrastructure and potentially no voting at all. Like, we are really quite close to a very dystopian America. So
Why
this
do you
is the
think
one.
why do you think so many people are so pessimistic about voting? Because I'm gonna be honest with you, as a Black woman, I have been very pessimistic about voting. The only reason up until this point, up until the issues of abortion, that I have voted is because I feel obligated to vote because my ancestors
We're
could
denied.
not vote and they were denied. So I how do we get past this hump as like Black and brown people about voting? Because a lot of us do feel like it is not going to do us any good. We're still going to be um undervalued, mistreated, underrepresented, and how do we move past that? And I understand that this is a very important election, and I feel like maybe that helps a little bit because these are issues that definitely affect us directly. But how do we move past the obligation of voting and make it our duty?
I mean, the thing is that voting is necessary but not sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
It is just one piece of a much larger puzzle about what it means to be a fully democratic citizen. Citizenship is more than voting by a long shot, but
Okay.
it's an essential part, which is why it's so contested. Who gets to vote and who doesn't get to vote determines a lot. And if there are a bunch of people who are disenfranchised and can't vote, then the power is consolidated in the hands of the same few on both sides of the aisles that are producing harm. So we need to elect better candidates. We need people with platforms that shift public opinion about issues that affect communities of color in all different ways, whether it's Native American communities and reservations, whether it's Black communities in rural and urban parts of America, because Black folks also live in the country. I don't know what to tell you. Right?
Yes,
or
yes.
whether it's immigrant communities, or whether it's naturalized citizens, or whether those things matter, and those voices need to be part of the conversation. And so fighting for representation is essential, even if it's not the end goal. It can't just be representation. It has to be a fundamental shift in the way we do business. And that includes reducing harm, and it includes producing joy and health and real safety, which comes from wages and jobs and, stability in communities that's not disrupted by, school shooters. And it includes, access to healthy food, and it includes child care subsidies so that people can pay to have their children watched in safe places. And it includes strong public schools. It includes lots of things. A lot of those things are on the ballot, though, like directly on the ballot.
And that's why it's important.
That's important. If you want money to go into your schools and your community libraries, which are like really that one free place that you can go and hang out and get literacy and learn stuff and get arts programming and connect with your community, then you have to go out and vote for that stuff. That is a direct 1-for-1. I voted for this bond initiative. We are going to expand the library. We are, going to build a new public school, right? We're going to do these things. And you have the control over that. It's necessary, but not sufficient, but we have to do it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr.
It's
Lisa
always
Corrigan.
good to see you.
Any last or final thoughts, or how can people I know you're super busy. So if people wanted to reach out to you when you're not busy, what kind of channels do you prefer?
Hit me up on Twitter at Dr. Lisa Corrigan. I'm there all the time.
I bet your Twitter goes off.
Occasionally it goes pretty off.
All right.
Yeah, come and see me on the internet. But please go out and vote. Make a plan to vote and get your people to go vote with you.
All right. That was INTERFORM Podcast. I'm Ro on the radio. Make sure you follow us on Instagram. It's interform.art. And we'll have some websites and things that you can go to get a sample ballot provided by Dr. Lisa Corrigan on our website. It's www.interform.art. Thank you so much, Doctor.
You are listening to INTERFORM Podcast with Ro on the radio. You're going to want to hear this.